Alright, ladies and gentlemen, so great job yesterday or maybe 2 days ago, depending on when you watch this video, doing the DBQ. It was an awesome topic and it was great to see you guys write. On Friday, we're going to have round 2. It's going to be difficult because it's going to be just the FRQ questions. We're not sure what is going to pop up. You're going to have a super thin booklet. You're going to have 4 questions to go off of. I don't even know how good this looks on camera. 4 questions. You ignore question 5 and question 8 because that is not something we talked about. You're just focusing in on the Civil War and Reconstruction era and the Gilded Age and Progressive era. Right? It's going to be right in the middle. Questions 6 and 7. Now when you're doing this, you're going to have over an hour and a half. Focus on the B's first, just like we did for the DBQ because it's worth twice as much as the A's. And we want to allot our time accordingly. Now you will always have these same formatted questions. Question A's will be a general discussion. Question B will ask you to agree, disagree, take a stance, and go with whatever topic that they're asking you for. So with question A, give me a paragraph, no more than 2 paragraphs. With question B, let's do a 4 to 5 paragraph essay. Spend most of your time on that. The example I have from 2018. How successful was the progressive movement in the period of 1900 to 1920? So when we're writing that intro paragraph talking about what the progressive movement was, who the progressive presidents were, what they were fighting for, then talk about these successes, talk about the failures, and then in our conclusion we would take a stand and say it was overall successful because look at the long-lasting amendments that we had from it, or it was not successful even though we have these amendments. Black people really weren't helped out too much. World War I happened, the rich got richer and the poor kind of stayed poor, so was it really that much progress? Right? You could take it either way. That would be a good response to question B from 2018. Right? But it's going to be something along those lines. Alright? So, we're doing a little review for the Civil War right now. I have this whole timeline I'm going to talk through that I had written on the board. What you should know is not so much the causation of the war. That was the DBQ. We talked about that. You don't need to know the intricacies of each and every battle. You need to know a couple of the ones, but really the impacts of the battles overall and not how the battles were fought, when the battles were fought. That's not important. Alright, so I'm going to talk through this timeline. I'm going to give you guys some key people in here, and I will post a picture of this on Canvas as well. But when we're looking at this, we need to understand how things flowed and evolved. So with the beginning of the war, first of all, we're going to go back to Abraham Lincoln wins the election. Right? That was in 1860. Abe wins, and we have the OG. First 7 states secede. South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana, and Alabama. All right? Shut up. Once they secede, we have the formation of the Confederacy. We have the Confederates removing Union troops from their land. And the North lets this happen because Buchanan is president. Now, as all of this is unfolding, there's this weird confusion because we have what's called the lame duck presidency. Right? One president knows he's not reelected, knows he's not going to be in office much longer, so there's a 4-month time period where they just do nothing. Lincoln is not in office yet. So during that lame duck period, the Confederates are removing and taking over Union forts in the Confederate states listed previously. No big conflict, no fight. Buchanan does nothing, just like he did during Bleeding Kansas. Then Lincoln takes office, and Fort Sumter is attacked. Lincoln calls for troops, which triggers the next round of secession. All right? This gets things rolling. And what Lincoln did during the whole time, his whole idea was, we're going to preserve the Union. I'm not going to take your slaves away. Right? This was an argument that he had. We're bringing everybody together. It's just a little rebellion. The Confederacy isn't even its own country because, like we talked about way back before winter break, the idea was if we address the Confederacy as a true country, We're going to give credence to this idea. We're going to give legitimacy to this idea. And we are going to make people understand and feel sympathetic or treat it as if it's an actual country. If we say it's just a little rebellion, just a little disagreement, European countries are going to be less likely to work with the Confederates. All right, it was a pretty smart strategy of Lincoln. So Lincoln calls for troops. He has this big, massive draft he wants to respond to Fort Sumter. It gets Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee to secede. And now we have the fully fleshed out Confederacy. All 11 states are working together under the leadership of President Jefferson Davis and General Robert E. Lee. Now, we talked way back about this. Something that may come up is why the structure of the Confederacy versus the structure of the Union, the differences between the two. A Confederacy was pretty much destined to fail because of the idea of no strong central government. Right? In a Confederate government, these states have the power. And as such, these states are taxing just the citizens of their states only. So when it's time to pay for the war, when it's time to outfit the troops, when it's time to get them bullets, guns, ammo, whatever, the states are handling their own. So I had this weirdo comparison for us way back where it had, there's the 5 fingers versus the fist. Right? In a Confederate government, my left hand, in a Confederate government, each finger is a state, and they are all acting on their own, completely weird, doing their own thing. It's not very organized. In the Union, all of the states come together, and they are strong under the leadership of Lincoln, a centralized government. And if you get into a fight, you're going to do much more damage with a fist than you would with the crazy fingers that aren't working together. Each of the states are acting of their own accord. Virginia, under the leadership of Lee, is fighting a war by itself, whereas Arkansas did not supply one single soldier to fight outside of the state of Arkansas. In the Union, we have all kinds of Northerners going down, fighting in one uniform army against the South. It was inevitable that the North was going to win. And that was an idea that probably is going to be brought up regardless of whatever the Civil War question is. The idea of the inevitability of the North to win is something that's probably going to be addressed. Okay? So following the timeline, we have Lincoln suspending habeas corpus. That was the idea that you needed proof and evidence in a trial to put people in jail. Lincoln gets rid of this because it's a time of emergency. There's this big riot in Baltimore, Maryland, trying to stop Union soldiers from getting down to Virginia to fight. Lincoln throws any anti-war people in jail without trial, which is, messed up, and it's the wrong thing to do. But he did it in order to preserve the Union. We have our first major battle, Bull Run.
Can I take your BBB for kids? I forgot.
Sure. We have Bull Run, which was a Southern victory. The North thought this was going to be easy. The North thought they were going to roll up and win really quickly. They were wrong. In the North, they fire their General Irving McDowell. He was lame, not great. They got rid of him. Replace him with McClellan. The North wins at Shiloh because of their use of railroads. So a question that has come up in the past, or some version of this question, why was it inevitable that the North was going to win? They had railroads. They had the infrastructure. They can move their troops from point A to point B much quicker using the rails than the South can by foot. That was a huge way that the North did better. All right, in Shiloh, North won under the leadership of Grant and through the use of railroads. But otherwise, it was the South taking it to the North and winning lots of victories here and there. We talked about this a while ago. Robert E. Lee's proclamation to the people of Maryland. He's trying to get Maryland to flip. Maryland has deep water ports, and if we think back, the goal of the South was to use their cotton resource as a way to get European allies to join on their side. It's really hard to trade massive amounts of goods across the Atlantic Ocean without access to these deep water ports. So if Maryland flips, They had the means necessary to gain a European alliance, and there was the bonus addition of Maryland being a border state, the Union states that had slaves. If Maryland flips, the rest of those border states would flip as well, strengthening the Confederacy. But Lee gets rebuffed, he loses at Antietam, he retreats, McClellan lets him go, he pulls a Frozen and just lets it go, and gets fired. Right? So, a question that happened in, I believe it was 2016, why did it take the North so long to win? A tweaked version of the inevitability that they would win. Why did it take so long to win? If we look at this timeline, which I'll keep explaining it, Lincoln fires McDowell, he fires McClellan, he fires Burnside, he fires Hooker. Names that you don't need to know, but you need to understand this turnover of generals in the North. This bad leadership at the top of the army cost them to drag out the war longer than they should have. They outnumbered the South 3-1. They had more guns and ammo. They had the factories. They had the railroads. It should have been a wrap a lot earlier, but it wasn't because of bad generals. Something to keep in mind. Right? After Antietam, we have the Emancipation Proclamation, which is a big deal. Lincoln frees the slaves. This is awesome. Except he didn't free all the slaves everywhere. He did it just in the states in rebellion, so just in the Confederacy. He did not free the slaves in the border states, meaning if the border states flipped to join the Confederacy at any point, they would lose the right to continue owning their slaves. Now, a big-brained person would take this thought a step further. Even though Lincoln never considered the Confederacy to be its own separate country, the Confederacy definitely did think that. Right? The Confederacy definitely 100% thought they were separate from the rest of the U.S. So, if a country that is different from the country you are in makes a new law, is it going to affect you? Anybody in here right now? If the leader of Canada makes a law saying that Floridians are not allowed to wear jeans, are we going to take our jeans off?
No.
No, Canada doesn't matter to us. So, in the Confederacy, are the slave owners and citizens of the Confederacy going to listen to the Emancipation Proclamation?
No.
So really the only thing that this definitely tangibly impacts was it stops the border states from flipping. Now some slaves found out about this, and a lot of them ran away and they went and joined the Union and they fought for the Union and they got some revenge and it was awesome. But this is much more of a political move than it is, hey, we're freeing the slaves, this is awesome, equality, yay! That's not a thing. Okay? So Burnside fired, terrible, great facial hair. Hooker fired, terrible leader, but his troops definitely loved him for reasons we talked about. Stonewall Jackson dies. This hurts the South terribly. He died at the Battle of Chancellorsville, which is also the battle Hooker lost and got fired. But these are all a piling of Southern victories up until Vicksburg and Gettysburg happened on the 4th of July, the same day. Now, these two battles are big deals for very different reasons. Vicksburg was a long, month-long battle in which the Confederates lost their last major fort on the Mississippi River. Once they lost access to the Mississippi River, the Anaconda Plan was completed. Right? The South is completely landlocked and split in two. The Anaconda Plan is going to stop them from getting contact with anybody outside of the continental United States, and really they're stuck fighting off and trying to play a defensive war from that point forward. Gettysburg is much different. Gettysburg was a big swing by Robert E. Lee. He was trying to get a northern victory. Right? He was looking for what we called a Saratoga moment, if we think back to us reviewing a little bit ago. The Battle of Saratoga was a revolutionary battle. It was a win for the Continental rebels, the revolutionaries. The Americans beat the British in a heavily British territory. This was a huge upset, and it proved to the rest of the world, specifically France, that the Americans had a chance to win. France joins in. France and America worked together to beat the British, and America was free. It was awesome. The Confederates were trying to do the same thing. They went to Pennsylvania, Gettysburg, a heavily northern pro-Union area. And the goal was to get a win against a bigger army on their own turf to get the French or the British or the Spanish or whoever, maybe even the Russians. Like Russia's going to help out anyone in America. Come on. The idea was if we win there, we'll get someone in Europe to help us out. Instead, the South loses so badly that they lost a third of their entire army in just one 3-day battle, and Lee is on retreat for the next year and a half. After Gettysburg and Vicksburg, after those same-day victories for the North, the South has no chance to win the war. Alright, the South is done. Their only hope is to drag it out for as long as possible and hope the North just decides this is too expensive, we're going to give up. And hope that maybe Lincoln loses the election of 1864, and because of that loss, the new president will end the Civil War. Now that doesn't happen. Lincoln wins the re-election versus McClellan, who is still really salty about getting fired. Lincoln wins the re-election. We have Sherman's march to the sea happen. General Sherman destroys the will of the South to continue fighting. During Sherman's march, we have a couple really cool things happen. The southern infrastructure and farm life is destroyed. Sucks to suck, you shouldn't have rebelled. But also, Sherman's going everywhere he can to free slaves, and he issues his Special Field Order 15, 40 acres and a mule. And we start seeing the seeds planted for what we hoped Reconstruction could have been, which I'll talk about in another video. Reconstruction was the idea of we're rebuilding the South, we're creating equality. 40 acres and a mule was beautiful. Every former slave is getting some of their slave owner's land and the tools and a mule necessary to work the land. And we start seeing steps towards equality being taken. Love it. Doesn't last long though because of racism. Yeah, we'll come back to that.
President Johnson.
President Johnson, terrible. Lee surrenders at the Appomattox Courthouse. The North wins. The Civil War is over. It's pretty cool. I do want to talk just a little bit about the election of 1864, which I did not mention too much in depth, but it was really funky. There were a lot of moving parts that may be mentioned on the essay on Friday. All right, so with the election of 1864, Lincoln is going for re-election. And we have all of these splinters within our major parties. The Republicans have Lincoln's guys, and then this group of radical Republicans, guys like Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner,
Chase,
who think that Lincoln is not doing enough to A, win the war, and B, free the slaves. So they start talking about replacing Abraham Lincoln while in office in the middle of the war. They nominate the guy from 1856 that we talked about in our last review, John C. Fremont, thinking that Fremont is going to take the nomination and run on his campaign of freeing the slaves. So Fremont was actually replaced in Missouri early on in the war because he believed that we should free and arm the slaves right away. And Lincoln said, chill out, dude, you're going to get my border states to flip. And he removed him and sent him out west. He came back in 1864. The radical Republicans thought Fremont would take the mantle and run against Lincoln for the Republican nomination. And Fremont said, no. If Abraham Lincoln wants to be president, I'm not going to get in his way. If you support me, John C. Fremont, you're supporting Lincoln in doing so. I'm not running against him, which is pretty cool. We also have a great divide of the Democrats. We have the war Democrats, guys like McClellan, who think we should continue the war. The Confederacy shouldn't exist. We need to come back together. War is necessary to do so. Andrew Johnson was also a war Democrat. He was the only Southern senator to stay with the Union during the Civil War. He was from Tennessee. Then we have the Peace Democrats, a different group. And what the Peace Democrats believed was the war needs to end as quickly as possible, even if it means the Confederacy should stay separate. And their best way to create peace was the North was going to surrender, and we were going to give you all the slaves back and rewind to the Missouri Compromise. Cool. Meaning that the last 4 years of war and the hundreds of thousands of people who died for nothing, and we're just going to pretend none of this happened. Not the best idea. This is the equivalent of, man, I have all this work to do in Canvas, but if I don't turn on my laptop, boom, I don't have any work. What up? Not great. So what Lincoln ends up doing was he replaced his previous vice president, a guy by the name of Hannibal Hamlin, and he chooses a war Democrat, Andrew Johnson, to be his running mate. We have Lincoln, the Republican, Johnson, the Democrat. We're talking about unity and bringing the country together, so what better way to do so than a Northern Republican and a Southern Democrat coming together as the presidential candidates of choice. We love that. And I mean, Lincoln's young, he's healthy. What's the worst that could happen? Dot, dot, dot. On the other end, we have super salty George McClellan looking for revenge, a war Democrat. And the most pompously named person in American history, Clement Vallandigham of Ohio, the Peace Democrat, running as his vice president. Lincoln wins. It's not that close. Vallandigham goes into exile in Canada for a while. McClellan goes back to the worst place in America, New Jersey. All right.
Don't forget the soldiers' vote.
Yeah, it was the kind of a close election until we ended up tallying up the soldiers' vote, and the vast, almost unanimous majority of soldiers voted for Lincoln.
No surprise
there. It shouldn't be a surprise to us, especially with Sherman and Grant's support. All right, so we have some key names and figures that I have written down here for the Northern hard facts, Southern hard facts. What we need to understand, we have a Southern Confederacy. The president was Jefferson Davis. They relied on Cotton to get their European alliance, and they wanted to fight a defensive war. The big names that we need to know for them are General Robert E. Lee and General Stonewall Jackson. We have some other ones on there that probably won't come up. Pierre Gustave Toussaint Beauregard, General James Longstreet. That's probably about it that you're going to need to mention for them. But specifically focus on Confederate structure of government, Robert E. Lee, and the defensive war ideals. In the North, we have McClellan, who went from being the top general to being Lincoln's political rival. We have the Anaconda Plan, which was a naval blockade to keep the South stuck. It ended up working out very well. Abraham Lincoln was our president. General Ulysses Grant is a big deal. The Emancipation Proclamation, we talked about that, and we talked about the border states. Just know, we're not sure what is going to be on this exam tomorrow. I'm not sure what it's going to look like, but the key thing to keep in mind is twofold. Why was it inevitable that the North was going to win? And that could be switched and flipped in many different ways. The inevitability of a Northern victory, the reasons why the South lost the war, right? Something along those lines. And it's also going to talk about the time of the war itself, right? Why did it take 5 years? Why did the war last from 61 to 65? Why was the North struggling from 61 to 63, but they ended up killing it in the last 2 years? Some version of the timing of the war and the length of the war is going to be brought up too, which is all well and great. But there's also the chance that instead of one Civil War and one Reconstruction question, we end up with 2 Reconstruction questions for the Civil War and Reconstruction section. That's happened before too. All right, so I'm going to make a Reconstruction video here shortly. If you have any questions, ask me. I'm here for you.
No. I'm here for you.
Oh, God.